It's time to start reading. So where are you gonna start? That's what this video is about. When it comes to picking your first book, there's only 3 major barriers to consider. Number 1 would be some sort of mechanical reading problem you have. Number 2 would be the book's readability. And number 3 is world building. Number 1, mechanical reading problems. I'm dyslexic, and because of that, I have to focus a lot more on the words on the page and turning that into something, an idea in my mind, and that act steals from my ability to build the world in my head because I'm processing the stuff. It slows me down for my reading speed as well, so I would think I read maybe a half as fast as a person who reads regularly would, and slower when I first started. And because of that, it changes what the first books that I would pick up. There's a simple way to sidestep this problem if you have it as well, and that's to pick a shorter book. For other readers, people that don't have that barrier, the book length is not as significant. But for us, and especially for me, seeing the progress that I would get through for an hour or two of reading would help me push through some of the more frustrating times I had while reading. That and the book would have to be exceptionally good to hold my interest and help me to just finish. Number 2, readability. Assuming you don't have some sort of mechanical problem reading like I do, this is going to be the primary barrier that you've got to consider while choosing your first book. Because of this, I'm going to say something that may anger a lot of avid book readers, and that is ignore the classics. Don't go for classics, sci-fi classics, history classics. Don't go for those things. You want to stick with contemporary. Most of the stories that you've heard up to this point have been through the visual mediums of movies and stuff like that. Contemporary books follow the same structures and are told very visually, which makes consuming them just so much easier. And that's what you want. You don't want to have to fight to gauge what's going on in Russia during this certain social revolution to understand the story. I guarantee you, your experience jumping into The Great Gatsby, your very first book, where no character is supposed to be likable, so why the crap are you even reading this book, is going to be very different than later on, after you've got a couple of books under your belt and you're getting bored of, Twilight or The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and you want something with more depth. You jump into The Great Gatsby, and all of a sudden, every word of every line means something more than it does at face value. The superficial stuff that's going on is just the very tip-top surface of the plethora of stuff to gain from that book. That book is something else, and a lot of the classics are very similar to that. So for now, skip them. You just want to enjoy your experience. You want to have the drive to read. You'll get into that stuff later on. Number 3, world building. And this, I read primarily sci-fi and epic fantasy, so I am aware of how much of a barrier this can be sometimes. And this is another reason, actually, why I suggest staying contemporary, because they handle this much better. Earlier on, in some of the more classic examples of sci-fi, or fantasy, they would dump in an exposition all that you need to know about the world, or a great deal at the first couple of pages, first couple of chapters. You have to slog through this realms and planets and why this thing flies and why that thing talks, and on and on and on for a good while. And, it was a barrier. Once you get past it, it's not a big deal. You get used to it. Contemporary writers are much better at, stuffing that stuff in slowly as you need it and making it make sense so the world comes to life as you go on. But for some people, they don't want to have to construct these whole other realms in their mind. It just sort of gets in their way. All right, now let me shotgun a few specific book examples in case, you have absolutely no way to decide on something. And these are not supposed to be fantastic books. They're just supposed to be written fairly well, easy to consume, and they'll be fun for you to go through, right? All right, so let's suppose you're going to go into something maybe a little scarier. Dean Koontz is a nice author. Most people would say, I guess, Stephen King, and I've read some of his books. But the only reason I would say Dean Koontz over Stephen King is Stephen King's books are so much longer in general. Dean Koontz has a lot of short stuff. There's also like the Odd Thomas series, which I think only has 4 parts up to right now, but they're short, easy to consume, fun books. Just you can push through them. You go in sci-fi, but you don't want to jump all the way in. Anything by Michael Crichton, pretty much. They're all short. They're all meant to be thrillers. They're all meant to make you want to continue reading. They're very, very easy reads. There's not much depth to them, but hey, it's a thriller. It's just you're just supposed to go through it and enjoy it, and they're very, very good at that. If you feel that his are a little less sciencey than you feel comfortable with, and you want something that's won't give up science as often. In lieu of story, then Robert J. Sawyer is a very similar author. If you want to jump into actual sci-fi, something that's new and that you could follow an author right now, there's John Scalzi's Old Man's War. It's fantastic little books. They're very quick reads again. That's what we're trying to stick with. Very easy to consume. They are sci-fi and there is world building, so you've got to be aware of that. Also, the Ender's Game is about to come out, and that is definitely an amazing book. It's very, very short. I can't say how easy it is to read, but the story is something else. As for fantasy, you can start with children or young adults books, something like The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan. There's still also Harry Potter or the Hunger Book series. I'm mainly choosing series for fantasy because it's nice to have, after being part of a world being constructed for you, continuing in that world. It's one of the reasons why I read fantasy, and generally epic fantasy. If the kid stuff isn't right for you, I would recommend stay away from Game of Thrones if you don't read all that often. It's very long because of the sheer exposition, the amount of time we spend explaining things that turn out to be useless because the dude dies in like the next couple of scenes. So of course there's Wheel of Time, which is by far my favorite book and my favorite story that I've ever heard ever. But it is a little bit to get through, and Jordan is not the best author in the world. There's also Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, and Jesus, those are nice. They're very skillfully written. The main character is not exactly likable, or rather he has a lot about him to not like, but it's very difficult at the same time to not sympathize with him just because he's so awesome. Which is a different experience. There's not a lot of movies that have a character like Cloth, and of course the story's nice, but he's also a very good author. Whereas I actually love Wheel of Time, and that is again my favorite story. I can obviously tell you that Rutherford is a better writer overall than Jordan. If you've got a book that you're interested, check out the reviews. Ignore anything that says it's too simplistic. Ignore anything that says it's written for children. Only pay attention to whether it's character-driven, whether it's contemporary, and that's it. Just get out there and start reading. It's one of the best decisions I've ever made. One last pro tip. Audible exists. Check it out.